Easy payments and deposit reconciliation. Try it with LawPay plus QuickBooks Online. You shouldn't have to waste valuable time getting paid for your hard work. Simplify your day with LawPay, an affordable online billing solution that allows legal professionals to quickly and securely accept payments. Now integrated for seamless workflow, you can automatically upload your LawPay transactions to your QuickBooks Online account. With easy transaction reporting and accurate deposit reconciliation, your firm will be equipped with the best tools in the business to help you do what you do best. Schedule a demo to learn more at lawpay.com/demo.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kirk Schroder. I'm an entertainment lawyer with the law firm of Schroder Brooks, and I want to welcome you to another edition of Brief Encounters by the DC Bar. And I am very, very excited today. Our topic is the return of Broadway and other theaters and the key issues that lawyers should know. And I'm excited because I have a dear friend and colleague that we go back many years, and she is one of the best Broadway lawyers and veterans, and that is Victoria Traube, who's the Executive Vice President for Business and Legal Affairs at Concord Theatricals in New York City. And so she's joining us from her New York City office. Vicky, how are you?
Glad to see you.
Thanks for joining me today for this podcast. Vicky, let's just start off. Obviously, the pandemic affected theaters, in particular with Broadway. And of course, at some point, the lights all went out. And now they're all coming back on. So can you kind of describe what the current environment is for, I guess, Broadway and off-Broadway and other theatrical companies from your standpoint of how the overall business and environment is for theaters?
Yeah, there are really three areas I'd like to talk about. One is Broadway. The other is the road, touring shows in the United States. And finally, the stock and amateur licensing business. Broadway is back, and Broadway remains very much the way it's always been. The big hits, the big musicals are grossing more than $1 million a week, which is really what you kind of have to do to make a run for it these days. And the successes are doing well, and the more challenging pieces are struggling and closing. But Broadway is doing very well. But an interesting thing happened in the theater, in the Broadway theater. The pandemic occurred at the same time that the murder of George Floyd occurred, which really focused a lot of people on a lot of things, and it focused people in the theater too. So when Broadway reopened in September of 2021, there were a lot of very serious plays, many of them dealing with racial issues and others that were just serious. And as shows like that have always done on Broadway, they struggled. And it was particularly hard because the audience was just getting used to coming back. And one interesting thing that we've noticed, and I think it applies across the board, is theater audiences tend to be on the older side, and older folks were more reticent to come back to the theater.
Why was that? Was that the subject matter of the presentations or just other health and otherwise?
Yeah, I think that was a true COVID issue because older people are more at risk. I mean, right now, the Broadway theater is pretty much business as usual. I still wear a mask, but nobody else does.
How about road touring?
Well, again, it runs true to form. The big shows are doing really well. These are mostly musicals, but To Kill a Mockingbird is a play that's doing extremely well. I think it grossed $2 million last week on the road, which is pretty extraordinary. But again, what we're seeing on the road is selective reporting, because the shows that aren't doing well just don't report. So you see a lot of $1 million plus numbers for the big musicals. So that is pretty much the same as Broadway.
Got it.
The hits continue to be hits, and the smaller shows continue to struggle. And that's how it's always been. But if the smaller shows are going to manage to run the straight plays, the difficult works. The really key thing is that producers need to plan and budget for a period where you just got to do a lot of marketing and sell the show to your target audience. And not all producers are establishing adequate reserves to keep a show running while you struggle.
Is there a rule of thumb for a reserve?
You really want to be able to keep going for a couple of months at a loss.
And how about the licensing world? What have you noticed post-pandemic in the licensing world? And for our audience, licensing being regional and other nonprofits that may license the works from organizations like yours?
Yeah, licensing is also almost back. I can give you an interesting statistic. In 2019, we had 28,000 executed licenses in the United States. In 2021, we had 13,000.
Wow.
So that was obviously not good, and lots of cancellations too. In 2022, we were back up to 24,000 executed licenses. Wow. So that is, it's a little off 2019, but it's getting closer.
Are there any new issues that have come up that people have learned post-pandemic in the business environment right now? Is it mainly still protecting against COVID, or have other things come up? And then we can get more into some of the licensing and things that you've done. Anything that's new now that lawyers or business folks would want to be aware of that wasn't there pre-pandemic?
What the pandemic did was to take a business that was already insanely risky and put it over the top for risk. It's generally thought that only 20% of the shows done on Broadway recoup their investment, let alone make a profit. Those are not wonderful odds. And what the pandemic did is, once the theater reopened after being shut down for a year and a half, the risk that shows would be shut down because of COVID continued. And the holiday season in 2021 was a complete disaster. Those are the most important weeks of the year between Christmas and New Year. And that was at the height of the Omicron onslaught. And everybody was getting sick and they had to close shows down. And you really can't, it had become impossible to insure for a COVID clause. So being a producer is very hard.
Have you noticed that any producers have disappeared on the scene as a result of this, or is it?
No, everybody's still around, but everybody is pretty nervous. I mean, we're on the upswing now. We had a great holiday season in 2022. There are maybe 15 shows on Broadway that are grossing in excess of $1 million a week. And a lot of shows have closed, but a lot of shows always close in January. The real problem this is not a legal issue. It's a problem for producers. If you're going to do difficult material, you have to be prepared to support it while it catches on. And you have to be able to sell it to the audience that will be interested in it.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears now because I think probably not many in our audience will be doing direct Broadway deals, but they may be doing licensing deals. They may represent smaller companies that want to license work or along that line. And I know that's really one of your power alleys, as my former boss used to say at my first law firm. So can we just talk about the licensing world and what are some of the key elements of that business and things that lawyers need to know there?
Well, the real work for a lawyer in the licensing business is when the show is acquired by the stock and amateur licensing house.
Uh-huh.
Although it's usually handled by an agent, sometimes with outside counsel involved, because there are several business/legal points. One is the amount of the advance. The other is the term. Those deals used to be always made for the copyright term, but now we're seeing a term of years. We don't like to do much less than 25.
Got it. Okay. And then how is an advance calculated?
We do an elaborate financial model.
Uh,
I don't do that.
Got it. Okay.
We have people who do that and they do it very well based on comparable shows.
Got it.
We can tell what the return on a specific investment is going to be. So that's how we approach it.
Okay. And then the ability to vary the material in the license presentation, how likely is that, or how restrictive is that?
It's pretty restrictive. All our licenses, and our licenses are form licenses.
Uh-huh.
So rarely would a lawyer be involved with getting a license for a professional production or an amateur production. But one thing some people don't know is that even when your local high school or middle school does a musical, you're getting a license.
And that's really what I'm focused on. I'm sure there'll be lawyers out there that will have the local high school or the local nonprofit will have a license agreement. They'll at the very least need to explain it to their client, even though some of it or most of it will not be non-negotiable. And so I want to try to just focus on those points so that lawyers will at least know what they're looking at, generally speaking.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's a good question. You're not going to be able to do anything about the royalty. That is what it is. But what your client...
Are there standard royalties? Like in the book publishing industry for trade back, hardback, their typical ebook. Does that work in your world of the licensing at the level we're talking about?
No, the royalty or the license fee is affected by the appetite to license the work.
Got it. Okay.
So something that had been a big hit on Broadway, either recently or sometimes a long time ago, will command a higher royalty.
Will that be on a gross or a net, the royalty?
The amateur licenses are flat.
Okay.
They're flat fees, but flat fees that are determined by the size of the venue and the ticket price and so forth. Professional productions are on an advance and royalty basis, and there will also be an advance for an amateur production, but much smaller.
Got it. What other sort of key issues would a lawyer need to explain to their client?
Well, the one that you touched on before, which is you are not allowed to make any changes in the show.
How do you define that, though? Is that a change in the script? Is it a change in the music? Is all of the above? Or how does...
It's a change in the dramatico-musical work, which would be the book or the music or the lyrics. Now, we rent arrangements and orchestrations for the music. And, sometimes some places just have somebody playing the piano and other places have a full orchestra. But they're working from our arrangements and a customary stock or amateur license.
Got it.
But what you get, the issue that keeps coming up is licensees who have a problem with something in the script, something that keeps coming across my desk. One of the shows we represent is Once Upon a Mattress, which has an unplanned pregnancy by an unmarried couple. And a lot of schools just don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Particularly those with a religious affiliation. So we're constantly being asked to let our licensees say less about Lady Larkin's pregnancy. And it's actually kind of a serious issue for us because we really feel that the work of the author has to be respected. Mm-hmm. So we don't agree to changes without actually going back to the author, if the author's around, or the owners. And we try to have a certain amount of flexibility. Let me give you one example.
Sure.
Some years ago, before the pandemic, we licensed a production of Oklahoma to a very important regional theater. And they wanted to do a gender bending version. Mm-hmm. And our licenses say you may not change the gender of characters.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, we really get that specific.
Uh-huh.
And in this particular case, because we had great faith in the theater and the director of the show, we agreed to a gay curly Lori. I didn't get to see that, but it was apparently a really interesting production. And I mean, I think that's something we're going to have to get more flexible about.
It's not unreasonable to make that request on things like this for that, some alteration if there's a legitimate concern and y'all will take it up. But generally, you try to respect the integrity of the work and the author.
Yes, that's how we approach it. But we also try to honor good ideas when customers have them. It's really not up to us, except with the shows that we own. And we do own the Rodgers and Hammerstein catalog. So there we can make the decision.
Got it. What other things that a lawyer may need to know just in explaining to their region when they're on the board of that regional nonprofit theater and they have that license that you think would be worthwhile for the artistic director or the business director of the theater to know when the lawyer explains?
I really wish there were more lawyers around explaining our licenses because I don't think most of our customers read them.
That's interesting.
And they're very, very specific and pretty and elaborate too. But for example, the right to do the dramatic or musical work doesn't include the right to use the sets or the costumes or the lighting design of the Broadway version. We don't control those rights, at least not for new shows. And there have been issues about that coming up where you end up finding at a not-for-profit theater a replica production that they're not licensed to do. So that's something to be aware of.
How about merchandising? How about when the theater company makes some T-shirts and some other things?
We are pretty forthcoming about T-shirts. And for the shows where we have the rights, we're willing to allow a video capture for the cast and crew so that, the parents of the kids who do the show can actually have a copy of it. But it has to be a real archival version. It can't be released publicly in any way.
So if I'm on a regional nonprofit theater board and we are taking a license, but we want to sell any type of merchandise, is that pretty much prevented, or is there any leeway there to do that?
No, there is some leeway, but you have to come to us separately. The merchandise rights are not part of our customary license.
But that would be a customary point that someone would take up with you in addition to the license. So they might be renting other things, and the merchandising rights would be a separate issue that you would take up depending on what people were proposing.
Yes, exactly. And as I say, we don't have merchandise rights for all of our shows, but for many of them we do. It's not a volume business. I mean, theater merch, even for a huge Broadway hit, is not like movie merch.
Sure. And I'm assuming, I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to confirm for our audience, artwork, poster artwork, and things like that, that would be reserved and unlikely to be able to use any of that. Is that correct?
Well, we license, as part of the licensing package, we include artwork. It's not always the artwork for the Broadway production. It may be artwork that we've had created over the years. But sometimes as part of the acquisition of the show, we've acquired the rights to license the artwork.
Okay.
That's kind of on a license by license basis. But the licensee gets a package and the artwork is in the package.
So it sounds like the key thing that lawyer needs to do is really understand what the local licensee is getting and what they're not getting, and make sure that matches up with the vision of what they're doing, and then address any deficiencies or things that they need separately with licensor or licensing companies such as Concord.
Yes, and something that you'd think everybody would be aware of, but sometimes they're not. We do not allow, with our shows that have characters of color, we do not allow blackface or yellowface.
Sure.
And for some of our shows, we require that roles of color be played by people of color. With The King and I, there are a lot of Asian characters. And I mean, they don't have to be from Thailand, but we prefer that the casting be appropriate, regionally appropriate.
Yeah. Well, in order to maintain the integrity of the original expression of the work. Let me ask, so this is a topic we could talk to much longer, but we have maybe 5 minutes or so. What are some key things that you think lawyers out there should know that we haven't really covered? I found one piece of advice we were talking before we started, which was everyone should actually be in a play or something to that.
Well, yeah, when we were chatting before we began the more formal part of this exercise, I said, I really think the best preparation for being a theater lawyer is having done some theater, in college or in summers or what have you, because being a theater lawyer requires a knowledge to the business. I mean, we're dealing in rights, not widgets. So you need a little bit of copyright law is helpful, but it's mostly what does the director of your production want to do with the show? Does he or she have a vision that might not be completely consistent with the text? I mean, at one point in my life, I was participating in a discussion, and it was a fairly acrimonious one between a Broadway star and a Broadway director about a lighting instrument that was making too much noise for the actor, but was essential to the visual effects that the director wanted. And I had, I'd run enough light boards in my day that I knew what that was about. Not that I did that well in solving that one, but that's the kind of thing that can come up.
Yeah. So there's a real due diligence process, regardless of your background, that you need to have with the creatives in understanding how that matches up with any of the business terms and the legal terms that may come in what is generally a non-negotiable license.
Yes, that's exactly right. You need to know what the director intends to do and make sure that that is either consistent with the terms of the license, or, I mean, you can come to us and ask for changes or, setting the show in a different place, which is, again, something that our license says you can't do. Mm-hmm. That's up to the authors or the owners. With the Rodgers and Hammerstein, we have the ability to make those decisions ourselves.
Got it. Any common mistakes you see that would be worth noting?
Not so much in the stock and amateur world. I mean, I think the problem comes up when there's a clash between what the director wants to do and what the text says and what the license says. That's the thing you really have to be aware of.
Okay. One last word of advice to anyone listening about anything.
My favorite piece of theatrical advice is don't put your own money in the show.
Okay.
And I think that ties in with what I've said about, the level of risk in the Broadway theater. Other people's money is much to be preferred. But then, of course, you want to recoup that money. It takes a gambler to produce a Broadway show.
And one with a lot of creative vision, I imagine, to do that. All right. Well, this has been another edition of Brief Encounters by the DC Bar. And I'm just so excited that Victoria Traube, Executive Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs at Concord Theatricals, was able to join us. Vicky, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Kirk.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you always for what you've done. And you're just such a great legal and business force in the theatrical world. And it's just always fun to keep up with you. So thank you again.
It's great to see you and talk about the theater.
Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to our next podcast.
This episode of Brief Encounters was brought to you in part by our sponsor, LawPay. Schedule a demo at lawpay.com/demo to see why LawPay is trusted by 50,000 law firms.